I am very proud to introduce our keynote speaker for today. AJ Mendez Brooks is probably going to be unfamiliar to those of us who are on the wrong side of 40, but she is very well known to young people and to WWE fans who follow professional wrestling. AJ recently retired from a very successful career as a professional wrestler with the WWE under the ring name AJ Lee, where she has won 3 championships and numerous awards, as well as inspired a generation of young women to wear sensible shoes. AJ has been made into several video game characters and action figures as well. This is a real first for NAMI, New Jersey. I've never had a keynote speaker who has had action figures. But the reason that AJ should become familiar to every single NAMI member in this country is for her exemplary mental health advocacy. As a public figure, AJ has used her fame to let people know that mental illness can touch anyone and that recovery is possible. She's written a book, Crazy is My Superpower, that outlines her personal story as a young Latina from New Jersey, she's a Jersey girl, who struggled with mental illness and her journey towards self-acceptance. Please give a very warm welcome to AJ Mendez.
I'm so honored to be here today on behalf of NAMI. I have witnessed and been inspired by the life-changing and life-saving work that this organization has been a part of for years. And to now be able to call myself a NAMI ambassador is a tremendous honor. It is both humbling and flattering. But to be perfectly honest, I feel like it's a pretty risky move on NAMI's part. Don't get me wrong, I appreciate their faith in me. It's just that I'm not exactly what you would consider a great role model. I'm a bit of a potty mouth, which I will try my best to control today, I promise. But usually most of my thoughts and opinions tend to just fall out of my mouth, swiftly and dangerously, like little appropriate conversation assassins. What else? Oh, I used to beat people up for a living. And I spent the better part of the last decade wearing hot pants in public, also for money. More on that later. But NAMI apparently does not scare easily. NAMI is brave. They are bold enough to let a woman who once wore an inflatable sumo suit on international television represent them. And I respect that about them. The people behind the scenes are forward thinkers. They know that this is the age of outrage. And if you want people to hear your message in the crowded, overstimulated avalanche of opinion and information that we live in, you might need to speak out of turn. You might need to color outside of the lines using all the damn crayons in the box. And while you're at it, you might need to ruffle a few politically correct feathers to get people to pay attention. So let's see if I can ruffle a few of your feathers. This is the interactive part of the speech. I'm going to say a list of words. And when you hear one that would offend you if someone called you it, please raise your hand. Nerdy. Scrawny. Weak. Impulsive. Ugly. Dirty. Poor. The remote didn't like that either. Trashy. Freak. Crazy. I don't know if you noticed, but I didn't raise my hand, not once. I understand that might be odd, considering that all of those words have either been shouted directly at me or spray painted onto my property. I've been labeled all of these words with a cruel and biting intention. I've been pushed into some of these hurtful, closed-minded boxes before I was even in grade school. And yet for some reason I chose to take what was once the most painful of these words and use it in the title of my very own memoir. This year I released a book called Crazy is My Superpower. And from the second the title was announced, people were pissed. And the shouting and the labeling got louder and more furious. So why would I choose to do that? Why use a verbal wound in the title of my life's work? Was I wearing my shameful scarlet C as a fashion statement? And why in the world would I go so far as to call it a superpower? Well, first, I really like comic books. And second, I really like proving people wrong. But to truly understand why I chose to co-opt the word crazy, you have to understand my story, which actually begins here in New Jersey. While every member of my family was born in New York, I was the only Jersey girl and damn proud of it. The Jersey I grew up in was rough, it was gritty, it was challenging. I didn't just live in New Jersey, I survived New Jersey. My parents, Robert and Janet, my older brother, Robbie and Erica, and the greatest mistake my parents ever made, me. We were basically Jersey gypsies. We lived in dozens of different towns all over the state, Guttenberg, Jersey City, West New York, you name it. We lived there for a solid couple of weeks and got the hell out before the rent was due. You see, we weren't exactly responsible bill payers. My father was a self-taught mechanic, and my mom was a home health aide, which is a nurse that visits the sick and elderly in their homes and occasionally brings their kids over to steal a patient's snacks. We didn't have a lot of money, okay? We were a family that lived paycheck to paycheck. And the meager paychecks my parents made were barely enough to provide for food or shelter or clothes. And my parents often had to choose between the three, deciding what exactly we needed the most to survive that particular month. The months when food would win that battle, we would lose our apartment. We would be evicted. And together we would squat in empty apartments or basements, just praying angry landlords didn't find us. Or we would just live in our car, a baby blue Monte Carlo the size of a small boat. And at night, every couple of hours, my dad would park it on a different street so strangers wouldn't see his family sleeping inside. Sometimes my parents were lucky enough to know someone who would let us stay in their basement or their garage or their back porch, and we were so grateful for that. The months when rent was actually paid, we would simply go without food. But that wasn't the worst of it to me. Because when you're a kid, your priorities tend to be a little messed up. And when you don't fully understand the gravity of your situation, the greatest tragedy to come from not having money is not having cool clothes. My sister and I actually shared about 4 or 5 different t-shirts and 3 pairs of pants from about the 1st grade to high school, not even kidding. And I'll never forget the day a girl in school decided to point this out in front of our entire gym class by asking real loud at the top of her lungs, "Do you just really like that t-shirt because you wear it every single day?" I was mortified. I could feel the fire of embarrassment just flushing through my cheeks, and my tiny fists of fury balled up at my sides, and before I knew it, the words were just flying out of my mouth. "Well, your mama liked my shirt last night." We were in the 3rd grade, you guys. I didn't even know this girl's mother. But my brother, knowing that I was a minuscule little runt, just primed for getting picked on, had prepared me with such classic comebacks should the need ever arise. So you could say I was a bit of a defensive child. It became my second nature to cover up the things I was lacking and hide from the world's judgmental eyes. Poverty made me feel inferior, and I didn't like that feeling. So I made a choice. I would make this situation work for me. I would simply pretend. I would pretend I was proud that I didn't have designer jeans. I would pretend I was proud I wasn't styled like every other lemming in school. I started stealing my brother's baggy t-shirts and sweatpants and just really leaned into my homeless aesthetic. I walked around with a forced, I don't give a crap attitude, and before I knew it, I actually didn't give a crap. I accidentally freed myself from having to worry about what I looked like, freed myself from having to worry about fitting in. I accidentally found confidence. It was a revelatory experience. I didn't have to let people make me feel less than. I could take on an oncoming attack on a profound insecurity, and I could twist it into protective armor. And as the years went on, as money continued to elude our family, as we began living in a 300 square foot motel room, my armor would thicken. And every day I would have to make that choice again. I would have to choose to not let the pain of my situation defeat me. I would have to pretend I was anywhere but a dark, depressing motel room, sharing a full-size mattress with my sister and my mother. Pretend I went to bed with my stomach full. Pretend I didn't feel scared and weak. I needed to find a way to make this situation work for me. How could I trick myself into feeling strong? How could I escape the confines of my bleak living situation? I would have to twist this oppressive reality into an opportunity for my imagination. The answer was clear. I would have to become a superhero. I'd always been a fan of comic books. They were just another thing I would steal from my brother. But we had lost all our books and toys in our many, many evictions. But I had a notebook. It was meant for schoolwork, but that wasn't important. I took this little spiral notebook, and for weeks on end, I drew in it. And I scribbled and I scribbled, and before I knew it, I had finished my very own comic book, starring me. Little superhero AJ went on adventures, saw the world, fought crime, and had lots of friends. All things I was definitely not doing in real life. Having a place to escape to feel strong and happy inside of, gave me peace of mind, which I was about to need more than anything in the world. Because soon, before I even got my first period, I would have my first panic attack. I didn't understand what was happening to me at the time. I woke up in the middle of the night, I went to the bathroom, and then I furiously washed my hands for 10 minutes. And those minutes seemed to kind of lose me. And I went back in bed next to my sleeping mother, and I just started hyperventilating. I was terrified, I was shaking, I was sweating. I began uncontrollably sobbing. And unfortunately, I was very, very loud because my sleeping mother woke up. And she opened her groggy eyes, and she took in my current state, and she gently asked me, "The hell is your problem?" But I couldn't speak. It was as if my mouth had forgotten how to form words. All I could do to respond was unintelligibly freak out. I mumbled nonsense through a fountain of tears as she stroked my hair and offered this soothing advice: "Stop acting crazy." And so I pretended. I pretended I was okay and I went back to sleep. In the months that would follow, I pretended I didn't feel a dark cloud growing over my head. I pretended I didn't wake up every day feeling cloaked in an invisible weight. Because I didn't want anyone to think I was crazy. I didn't want anyone to think I wasn't strong enough to be sane. But my mom pretended too. You see, she didn't tell us at the time that my mom was fighting a battle against depression. And she fought every day to silence it. My panic attack in her eyes seemed proof that her depression, that her darkness was spreading. And she couldn't let that happen. And so she kept quiet, and she kept her own personal crazy at bay. But over time, it became harder and harder for me to keep pretending. Even though our living situation would improve, after a few years, I didn't feel any better. We got an apartment, there was some food in the fridge, but the seedlings of depression had begun to sprout from my heart and my soul until it's covered my skin like vines. Whether I was in the school cafeteria or plopped onto our living room couch, I would feel an indescribable unease. Sometimes I would feel heavy and foggy, like I didn't actually exist in the moment. And other times my senses were almost too sharp, heightened to the point of paranoia. I desperately wanted to feel alert while reeling in my nervous energy, maybe even transforming it into excitement. And so I discovered video games. Not only did they help me feel focused, they helped me feel useful. I would sink hours of my time into video games about the zombie apocalypse, or about genetically enhanced super soldiers, or about a bobcat hiding from aliens. These are all real games. And I would feel weightless and happy. I would lose myself in a story I would see through a hero's eyes, or bobcats, and I would live as a character who was strong and capable of fighting off the darkness. Because in my world, I was crazy. And I needed to feel like the personal limitations were not in my life. I needed to be transformed into these heroes. Whether it was a comic book or a video game, or my growing obsession with professional wrestling, which, if you're not familiar, is a sports entertainment program that is half ultimate fighting and half soap opera for men. And these worlds would make me feel safer than my own. I was crazy. I was an insomniac. I had constant panic attacks. I would sometimes shower 3 times a day so I could cry without anyone noticing. Some days I would be afraid to leave the house. I was already labeled so many embarrassing things, I couldn't stand the idea of giving anyone else an extra weapon to use against me. I was the trashy poor kid. I was the scrawny runt of the litter. I was the ugly duckling. I didn't want to be the crazy chick. And so I worked hard to write my own story and control the narrative. I gained such a knack for living in and creating these imaginary worlds. I would apply to film school when I was 17. I made it into NYU's Tisch School of the Arts, focusing on film and television writing. For me, this was not only an opportunity to follow my passion, it was a way for me to write my own happy ending. But do you know what's really common in television and video games and comic books and soap operas? Tragic twists. 6 months into my first year in college, my mother would end up in a psychiatric hospital. After suffering for years with what she thought was depression alone, her illness got the better of her, and she had a breakdown. What we would eventually learn is that my mother suffers from bipolar disorder. And I don't have to explain this to you guys, but you know. By definition, bipolar disorder is a mental disorder characterized by alternating periods of mania and depression. In less scientific terms, it is a real prick. The disorder strips a person of control. Those affected experience unexpected and unwarranted highs that increase adrenaline, paranoia, and recklessness, and lows that induce panic attacks, relentless sobbing, and overwhelming lethargy. A person's heart, mind, and actions either become amplified to a dangerous degree or unrecognizably distorted. Hearing this diagnosis, something inside of me began to yell out. But I chose to ignore it and stay inside the safe, warm world of make-believe. I silenced this gut instinct as I came home from school every weekend to take care of my mother. I silenced the pleading voice as I continued to cry every day for no reason, as I locked myself in my dorm room, afraid to look another human in the eyes. I silenced my pounding heart as I began to unravel. Overwhelmed by tuition I couldn't afford and a life I couldn't control, I would end up having to leave school before I could ever graduate and fulfill my writing dreams. I would end up back in the darkness and the uncertainty of poverty. And one day, I woke up in the hospital too. At the age of 19, I had overdosed. In a haze of overwhelming pain and confusion that to this day I cannot fully explain, I ingested an almost lethal combination of pills. I had tried and failed to commit suicide. But for some reason I also cannot fully explain, I survived. And in surviving, I was forced to make a choice. Would I go on pretending, or would I face my truth? I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Like our olive skin tone and our caterpillar eyebrows, I guess it just runs in the family. I had tried to silence the voice in my head that recognized my own reflection in my mother's eyes. I had tried to silence that gut instinct, and I almost paid the ultimate price. This was the lowest point of my life, but somehow, hitting rock bottom is what truly set me free. I had a diagnosis. My lifelong dark cloud was given a name, an identity. It was no longer ominous and confusing. It was real, and I could fight it. Like my cheap clothes or my scrawny body, I couldn't change its existence. But I could find a way to make this situation work for me. I got treatment, I went to therapy, and for the first time in years, I found peace. Perhaps the most interesting and most vital discovery in this process was figuring out that my excitable moods, my tender heart, my comfort, and the fantastical, though attributes of my disorder could not only be used as armor, they could be used as my greatest weapons. I believed in the worlds of the impossible. I saw the world in different colors because I was bipolar. Eventually, thanks to my delusions of grandeur, I would decide to become my very own real-life superhero. I put on some spandex short shorts, and I started fighting bad guys. I began professional wrestling school. Yes, that's a thing. I would channel my aggression and my energy into beating people up in the ring. I had access to a million emotions, and those would come in handy in the larger-than-life Broadway play-like performance of a wrestling show. I auditioned for the biggest pro wrestling company in the world, the WWE, and I got hired to travel the world with their circus of performers. I was used to living like a gypsy, with all my belongings in one bag, and so traveling to a different city 5 days a week, 300 days a year, no off-season, sleeping in tiny hotel rooms and never having a place to rest my head, it felt normal. Inside the ring, I could channel the superheroes I read about in vibrantly colored pages. Instead of pushing buttons on a controller, I controlled the action. But even in pro wrestling, I still possessed negative labels. I was still too ugly to compete with the beautiful models in the industry. I was still too scrawny to seem intimidating. My clothes were too cheap to be impressive, too average to be considered sexy. And what was I supposed to do with all of this shameful crazy? The answer to all of it was to just let my freak flag fly. Our international audience of millions connected to my average clothes because they wore them too. People liked my loud mouth and my stubborn attitude because they desired the freedom to be brazen in their own lives. Our female viewers connected to me because they could see themselves in my eyes. They felt they weren't pretty enough or strong enough, but seeing all 5'2", 100 pounds of me fight as the underdog and win, they could believe in the impossible. Seeing how our audience embraced me not in spite of, but because of the things I was most insecure about, made me realize that I needed to embrace the label that scared me the most. I needed to embrace my naturally given superpower. After fighting for a storyline that would respect mental illness and showcase its roller coaster of emotions, I got to bring my brand of crazy to the screen. I magnified emotions that came from a very real place, twisting them into fiction. The writers and I created an unpredictable, emotional, excitable powder keg of a character. What were once my worst traits were now the most interesting part of my alter ego. And suddenly the feelings I was once so ashamed of were now being acted out in front of an arena of thousands of people, on TV, in front of millions. My character was nicknamed the Crazy Chick. And this embellished version of my bipolar secret identity was made into action figures, was in video games, and won championships. All with the support of an audience who celebrated my flaws. After almost a decade in wrestling, I decided to retire. I wanted to plant those elusive roots I've never had. And I realized that walking off screen was the best time to stop hiding in plain sight. I got back in touch with my love for writing, except this time I would not be creating a work of fiction. This time I would tell my story, mistakes and all. And even though I was terrified, I would expose my blood and bone and write about my life with bipolar disorder. And wrestling fan support never wavered. Crazy is My Superpower became a New York Times bestseller in its first week. I took a winding path to get there, but I accomplished my dream of writing. I had always believed crazy was a bad word. Politically incorrect, insensitive, offensive, taboo. The word held so much weight in my childhood that I removed it from my vocabulary. I trained myself to fear it, to be ashamed of it. I believed mental illness was a burden to be carried solemnly and, more important, quietly. In silence, family members tried and failed to tighten their ever-loosening screws. And in silence, I stood by as the illness ravenously consumed the person I loved most. Being quiet got us nowhere. Ignoring the problem only helped to fan its flames. And just when I began to understand what the illness was truly capable of, it came for me. When I was diagnosed, I believed my illness would be my great, lifelong weakness. There were times I let it consume me. I let it take everything until I had almost nothing left to give it. I let it be my fatal flaw. But the interesting thing about flaws is that they truly are in the eye of the beholder. Weakness can turn into strength with just a simple shift of perspective. You get to choose. One day I made the choice to stop throwing myself a pity party. I chose to stand up and fight. I would embrace what society taught me to shun. What was once my shameful secret had become my secret weapon. When I harnessed its seemingly uncontrollable might, I realized bipolar disorder's powers could be used for good. My diagnosis didn't have to be an affliction. It could simply be the gift of extraordinary emotions. When a loved one hurt, I could feel their pain with every inch of my skin through my superhuman ability of empathy. When I witnessed injustice, my anger was transformed into righteous indignation, and nothing could stop me from raising my voice. My passion-fueled soul convinced me to jump into life head first without overthinking. When I was scared, my supersized heart reminded me I could be invincible. And when I doubted myself, my overachieving mind told me I was capable of flying. And when I desired something, there was not a person on earth who could hold me back. I could walk through fire if it meant making my dreams come true. And that is the gift being bipolar gave me. It blessed me with a lofty imagination, an iron will, and an unbreakable belief in the impossible. I used my gift to take me from being homeless, to being an athlete on international television, to being a best-selling author. I became a woman with a mission. But what good is a secret weapon if it only serves me? I wanted to reveal my secret identity. I wanted to shine a light on mental illness. I wanted to be vulnerable about the days I let it take control and I paid dearly for it. I wanted to let people know I am bipolar and I am proud. And to anyone fighting a similar battle, I needed to let them know they were not alone. They were not broken. They did not need to wait for a hero. They could become their own. And now, at this next stage of my life, I hope to be a resource for those fighting similar battles against mental illness. Being here today makes all of you a part of that fight. Even if your personal battle is a different one, my message to you is the same. Embrace your crazy, your imperfection, your weakness, whatever that may be, because I promise you, it is the most special thing about you. I've been labeled a lot of things in life: nerdy, loud, short, stubborn, ugly, freak, crazy. Everything I was told should be my greatest insecurities, weaknesses, my biggest roadblocks, turned out to be my greatest strengths. I didn't become successful in spite of them. I became successful because of them. I'm no longer afraid to be called crazy. Crazy is my superpower. So ask yourself, what will yours be? Thank you.